Okay, and we have Lisa John, who's recording for us. Hi, Lisa.
Hi,
Nice
Dale.
to
How are
meet
you?
you.
Nice to meet you guys too. I'm just
Thank
here if
you.
you guys need to ask me any questions or need anything from me. I am here to help, but I will let you guys do your thing.
Okay, we're going to get started. It's now 6:01 p.m. And 1 second, I'm just going to pull up my agenda on my computer. So, welcome everyone. This is the task force, the Niskayuna Task Force on Racial Equity and Justice. And as I said, it's 6:01 p.m. and we'll get started. We do have some preliminary announcements before I do the roll call, but this is an official call to order. Um, as was indicated, we have two people that have indicated that they may be late. Ms. Arinka Abad and Dr. Antikowski. We also have an excused absence from Alan Gadsden. Dr. Horton has to leave early. He has commitments with the Allyship Institute. So, Doc, I will remember at about 6:45 to motion to you at that time. Is that appropriate? Okay. And Jillian, I just wanted to say welcome. I'm happy to see you looking healthy. Thank you. Okay, at this time then, we will do a roll call, taking the absences and latenesses into consideration. Um, David Amadeo, can just indicate by saying here.
Here.
Okay.
Thank you.
Myself, Dale Black Pennington, I'm here. Kay Bodhenker.
Here.
Sandra Griffin.
Here.
Dr. Horton.
Here.
Priti Irani.
Here.
John Lemelin.
Here.
Jillian Margolis.
Here.
Elizabeth Paul. I see you, Liz. Can you hear us? Oh, you're not able to unmute. I'll note that Liz did advise us earlier that she's having computer problems and she will not be able to unmute at certain times. If you need to say something urgently, Liz, you can always text it if you wish. Jamie Puccioni.
Present.
Larry Ritter.
So Larry's microphone is having trouble with his microphone, but he's here.
Okay, I see him motioning.
He's motioning.
And Devon Wembley. Okay, I didn't receive a notice from Devon. I don't see him here. So we'll mark that as an absence at this time. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, we do have a quorum, so we can move forward and vote on the approval of the 10:14 minutes. Those minutes were emailed to each member. And at this time, I'll open it up to comments. I'll go through the names of each person here. Or actually, if you wish to make a comment, you can just motion and I'll call out your name and we'll take your comments. if I do not receive comments, then we'll just move forward with the vote. Any comments on the minutes from October 14th? Okay, I don't see any motioning. So at this time, let's take a vote to approve. I motion to approve the minutes from
I'll
October 14th.
second that.
Thank you, David. So at this time, David, your vote?
Approved.
I approve. Kay?
I approve.
Sandra?
I approve.
Dr. Horton?
I approve.
Miss Arani?
I approve.
John Lemelin?
Approve.
Jillian Margolis?
Approve.
Elizabeth Paul? Okay, she's motioning and shaking her head. It appears to be approval. Jamie Puccioni?
Approve.
Larry Witter? Thank you. And so at this point, the minutes appear to be approved from the October 14th, and we will move on to the next matter. Our communications officer, Kay Bodhanker, has drafted suggested task force shared agreement. That agreement was sent as a second page to the agenda today, and Kay will be discussing her suggestions for a shared agreement. So I will turn over the stage to Kay.
Thank you, Dale. Good evening, everyone. This is something that we had, I had brought up at our last meeting. Now that we have a structure in place, we have the leadership in place, just the next step of something to discuss as we move forward in our work and on our purpose. So the reason we're calling them shared agreements and not ground rules is because it's not about what you should do and what you shouldn't do. This is about, creating accountability and mutual respect. It's about how you want to be in our time here together. And I hope all of you had a chance to read and reflect a little bit on some of these agreements, but I'll still go through them really quickly, and stop me if you have something to add. So the first one is respect. Very easy. Very straightforward. Respect the space, this time, and each other. The reason I've said this space and this time is also because there's so much going on around us. Full-time jobs, full-time, home lives, community lives, social lives, everything got mixed up together inside a space. So it's really hard to, draw that line between our various commitments. So as you respect this place and this time, you're also respecting each other's time that they're putting into this effort and into this purpose. So that I thought that was important. The second one is self-explanatory. Be the expert of your own experience. Use I statements. This is just a reminder to stay away from generalized comments, and stereotyping doesn't need explanation. Airtime, share time. Again, a fun play of words. There are some people who are, shy. They're not big public speakers and might need nudging to come up and share their views. So this is inviting more collaborative working space. Let's try not that anybody does it, but let's not try to hog the speaking time here. Lean into your discomfort. And thank you, Preeti, for that question, which you had raised about what does it mean to lean into your discomfort. And I would also kind of rely on Dr. Horton as, one of the experts in this area, if you can add to it. But to me, conversations that we will have, going into this work, some of them are going to be uncomfortable topics. Some of the items we'd rather keep quiet and not talk about. Leaning into discomfort is acknowledging that this is an uncomfortable area for me. This is a topic that I would rather not talk about, but I want to talk about because my voice is important here. So that's what it means to basically lean into your discomfort and get out of it's like saying get out of your comfort zone and do this and say this. That's what it means.
I think you did an excellent job with the explanation. I don't have anything else to add. Well done.
Thank you. The next one is intent and impact both matter. Again, very self-explanatory. As we share things, as we write things down, please note that what you're writing in an email is being read with a body language that the other person is perceiving. So your intent might be pure. How it comes across can be very different than what you had intended. So what you say and the impact of those words, whether they're written or they're said here, just be conscious of how they come across. And the last one is alignment and agreement are not the same thing. And this is something that I have come across in a lot of management seminars and webinars, and I thought this was very interesting. Alignment is where we're all aligned to the purpose. There's a purpose for this task force. There's a mission, vision, and we're all aligned to that purpose. That doesn't mean that we all have to nod our heads and just say yay to everything. Disagreements, or rather, agreements and disagreements is the area where we get an opportunity to hear each other's ideas and perspectives, which is why it was important to differentiate the two words, that alignment to a common purpose and agreement are not the same things. That was just a first draft, open to ideas. Preeti, you had a great suggestion about intentional inclusion, if you wanted to kind of elaborate on that.
Yeah, I think when I said because this is a racial equity task force, we do have a task, a responsibility to reach out to folks who ordinarily may not speak up, who may not feel comfortable speaking up, leading into the discomfort. And so we have to kind of be proactive and reach out. So if you're not intentional, it's very easy to get caught up in our own discussion. And so we really have to reach out to folks who we feel their voices are not heard. And this just comes from, say, economic development in Schenectady, for example. We see that it's happening mostly in downtown. And if you don't go a little beyond downtown, it'll never get out. So that's what I mean by intention. That's how traditionally economic development works. You open it up to everybody and you say, yeah, it's open to everybody. We're not excluding everybody. But there are folks who need an extra nudge, extra training. And so you have to be intentional, saying, okay, we want to include everybody, but some people are just not stepping up. So what can we do to make them, feel welcome, feel like they're on par? So it's like being intentional about it rather than saying, oh, it's free for all, everybody's welcome. That's what I meant.
Great point. And we'll definitely add that as our next point.
And the other part I also wanted to add is something about kindness. It's just that these 4 years, the one thing that really, I think, struck me is, with the administration, how cruel everything was. And I think having respect is not the same as kindness. They're two different things. I would like us to be seen as very kind, and so that is the other part I would say is to put kindness. Sometimes people may say the wrong things and may even, without intending to be offensive, sound offensive, and to, give them a second chance or clarify or gently kind of probe, how you can find some connection. Those are my two things. Yep, thanks.
Great points, Preeti. Thank you. Any other comments, suggestions? Dale, I would defer to you, but I'm not sure if this is something that has to be voted on. This is, again, a working document, not a code of conduct per se. So this could be noted as a discussion item only.
Okay, I think, Kate, you've indicated that it is a work in progress. And considering the input that you've received, if you could finalize the document by the next date, we'll take a vote on it as an agreed upon shared agreement that the working groups may adopt, and advise us of their adoption when they're, actually working and in progress.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you. A couple of things that I overlooked with our introduction. I did say hello to Lisa Stevens, who is currently handling our technology. She is the one who got us connected today, and she's working with us. I see Laura Robertson, who has also been helping us, is present. And hello, Laura. And additionally, I'd like to welcome our town attorney, Paul Briggs, who's present. I apologize for not acknowledging all of your presence earlier. And thank you for participating in our meeting. I also welcome all comments and participation from town citizenry. I believe that we are being viewed. However, at this point, we haven't developed the ability in our meetings to have immediate feedback and participation with the community. We're working on that, and hopefully we'll have it up and running soon. So we're happy to have our whole community participate in this task force effort towards racial equity and justice. To that end, I have to share with everyone, including the general task force body, that on October 20th, an email was sent to the leadership, and we were new at that time, from a board member, Rosemary Jaquith, and she informed us that our town historian had some concerns about how we could incorporate racial equity and justice and possibly rethink our town seal. To that end, we invited the town historian to explain that to us so that in the future we can incorporate that into our working groups' goals and something to examine. So at this time, I'm going to turn the floor over to our town historian. Welcome, Dennis. Hello? I just lost him on the screen. John, did you see that? Are we able to get him back?
He looks like he just disappeared, so maybe just give him a minute to dial back in. He must have clicked the wrong button.
Okay.
He might have clicked the hang up instead. So
Yeah, it looks like he disappeared and Angela clicked in at the same time
yeah.
somehow.
Okay, welcome, Angela. We can't see you, but we know you're here.
Hi, yep, thank you. I've been here for about 5 minutes.
Okay, great. So you're here just in time to hear the presentation from our town historian. Give me 1 minute. Dennis Brennan, Mr.
Yep.
Brennan, are you ready and prepared to give us a brief presentation on the history, the racial equity and justice history of this town and our town seal?
Yes, I'm ready. I would like to present a PowerPoint presentation. Do I just hit present now and can somebody tell me?
Is that fine?
Uh,
Yeah, I think you can do it in that way, but I hate to.
At the bottom of your screen, it says present now. over in the bottom right-hand side, and you can just click on that, and it should take a second to show your desktop. There you go. Perfect.
Okay, you got that? All right. First of all, I will say, in keeping with Kay's comment about shared agreements, I feel like I'm a bit leaning into my discomfort with this topic. Here I am, an old white guy, and for me to be talking about racial inequity seems a little out of my depth, but I'll give it what I can. I'm calling this a little bit of an introduction to Niskayuna racial history, and I should preface this by saying the town historian's job goes back to 1919 in New York State, at any rate, and there's not a lot of information that I found about racial history or social injustice in the town historical files. And I think that largely has to do, and I think it's worth mentioning, it largely has to do with the notion that a town historian, municipal historians, county historians tend to be promoters and advocates for their town or whatever region they're talking about. And so they tend to talk about the bright, shiny spots and not talk about the problems. I actually a trained academic historian, so I don't quite agree with that, but it's I think it's something that we do need to look at. But I'll begin by going back in a little bit of a history of Niskayuna. Niskayuna, as you may or may not know, supposedly means extensive cornfields. It's either a Mohawk or a Mohegan word or some combination of the two languages. Niskayuna, it's spelled, according to what I've read, about 65 different ways. And it refers to the area we live in, which was once a summer cornfields for both Mohawk and the Mohegan natives, who would come here, grow corn, and carry it back to their winter or fall and winter encampments. The diorama, the images I'm showing here, are dioramas from the State Library, and they may be rather romantic images of what this might have looked like, but it sort of does give an understanding, present an understanding of what the area was. And of course, it wasn't just corn, it was the Three Sisters, as I think every fourth grader in New York State learns: corn, beans, and squash. And it was a rather extensive area in the region. This map, this is a map from 1756, and I can blow up a section of it. Shows the Niskayuna on both sides of the Mohawk, which is accurate. And of course, by 1756, some development in our region, in what we know now as Niskayuna, as well as over in Clifton Park. It's interesting to theorize what some of these buildings might have been. This one I'm pointing at right now might have been a Gabbot house, a praying house where before we had our first, the Dutch Reformed Church in town. It was also a school during the week, in addition to a prayer house on weekends. And this other house over here, I would speculate, might be the Van Ranken house, or a Van Ranken house, maybe a forerunner to the great meadow farm that was just sold recently over in that part of the town. But the Van Rankens go back that far. And I also like this Rosendahl. That's Rosendale Road, of course. And Rosendahl was from the Dutch. It meant Valley of the Roses. And so that's where the name of that town comes from. I think I have another map here, just a little bit more accurate map. Again, I'll blow up a section of it. Shows again Niskayuna over here. Just shows it on the other side of the Mohawk, but it was on both. And it shows that the area which we are now in, Niskayuna, was just the other side of the Rensselaerwick Manor. And of course, this line still represents the southern boundary of Niskayuna. The other interesting, and I think worth pointing out, parts of this map is Norman's Kill, which empties here, or the mouth is in the Hudson River here. This is where a summer fishing camp for the Mohawk existed, and it was really where the first settlement, what might be called the settlement of Albany, came about. And it's important because in that area there would be a treaty arrangement between the Dutch and the Mohawk, which would be beneficial to the development of both Schenectady and Niskayuna. The Niskayuna settlers supposedly stayed outside of this Rensselaerwyck line because they wanted to avoid the patroons, and I guess they wanted a little bit freer trade or freer opportunities to live and work without the influence or the control of the patroons of the Rensselaerwyck Manor. This area was part of the Iroquois Confederation. This map is somewhere at the beginning of the 17th century. The 5 nations that made up the Iroquois Confederation: Seneca, Cayuga, Onondaga, Oneida, and the Mohawk. Mohawk, of course, is what we call them. They have their own name. I cannot pronounce this here for what they are. And like so many Native American tribes, the name that we have assigned to them, or was assigned to them, might be actually an insult. It comes from an Algonquin word called the Mohawk Bear People. The Bear People may have something to do with their work in the Adirondacks. Another important part of this map is worth mentioning is you obviously see Schenectady and Niskayuna are outside of what's marked as Mohawk territory. And this territory was shared for a long time, peacefully shared primarily between the Mohawk and the Mohegans, who are off now on the other side of the Hudson River, until the Dutch showed up. It may have also been because of the establishment of the Haudenosaunee Confederation, somewhere between 1450 and 1650. The Haudenosaunee Confederation, Haudenosaunee meaning people of the Longhouse. These are the people we call the Iroquois in English. At the time the Dutch arrived, the Confederation was formed. The Iroquois were becoming a much more powerful people. And in addition, they wanted to monopolize the trade with the Dutch. And so war went on for the next, from 1600 or 1613 or 14 to maybe 1630, in which the Mohawk and the Iroquois pushed the Mohegan off to the other side of the Hudson River, across into Massachusetts and Vermont. Basically, there was a rather benign relationship that is documented in Dutch and English literature about the Native American and the Dutch or the English relations in the Schenectady and Niskayuna area. And there are 2 reasons why this might have been accurate. One of those is, I'm sorry, this is just another map. I just wanted to point out that the Mohawk do have a community center currently out near Fonda. So the Mohawk people are still around. The first reason for this sort of benign relationship was a treaty of alliance and cooperation between the Dutch and the Mohawk and the Oneida nations. Very quickly after the Dutch arrived, they knew they needed the help of the natives. The natives knew they wanted the help of the Dutch as well. So there's a shared reason, there was a beneficial reason for the 2 of them cooperating with each other. And they put together this wampum treaty. This is the belt that indicates the wampum treaty. It shows 2 different people sailing. The idea is 2 people sailing down the river side by side, pledged to peace and friendship, pledged to trade and coexisting without interfering with one another. In 2013, the Iroquois down in New York at the United Nations celebrated the 400th anniversary of this treaty. And I'm very proud of the fact that the Iroquois have never violated it. And there's no record that I've seen so far that the Dutch violated. Although I do tend to wonder whether they did or didn't. The Dutch in other parts of the country, specifically New York area, I would say, were not known for their kind treatment of the Native Americans. We all know about the English coming in and taking over New York in 1664 without a fight. Part of the reason for that was the people of New York were tired of fighting because the Dutch had spent probably several decades before the English arrived fighting Indians down in that area because they weren't treating each other very well. But at any rate, they had this alliance and cooperation agreement which seemed to be working. There was also very quickly intermarriage between the Dutch and the Mohawk. Hillety van Slyke van Olinda was the daughter of Cornelius van Slyke, who was one of the early settlers, traders who came to Schenectady. Van Slyke Island is named, actually, I think, after his son. But he had a number of children with his Mohawk wife, and Hillety became an interpreter, a negotiator between the Dutch and the Mohawk, and she was so successful that, according to legend, this again I haven't verified this, but according to both Mohawk legend and Dutch legend, she was given either Shaker Island by the Mohawks or 5 different islands in the Hudson, in the Mohawk River, right by old Niskayuna, down by the railroad station, as a gift and in thanks for all that she had done for the relations between the two sides. So there were some indications that there was a beneficial relationship, a benign relationship that existed between the two sides. But I do think that more work needs to be done in examining and talking to and getting more about the Mohawk side of the story. That is not the side of the story we have here. We have basically the Dutch side, and I'm sure there's probably a little bit more to it. So understanding that would be useful and something I would like to pursue. Which brings me to the seal. There are 2 common seals that have been used by the town of Niskayuna over the last several decades. There's a few other minor ones that you might see once in a while, but these are the 2 principal seals that are being used. The first one I call the bicentennial seal because it was designed in 1976 at the time of the bicentennial, and the images were supposed to tell the history of the town, some of the history of the town, obviously, with the Erie Canal and the Knowles Atomic Power Labs, and what's supposed to be a Shaker farmer. There actually were no Shaker farmers in Niskayuna, but there certainly were plenty of farmers. And then, of course, the Indian, the Native American, shown holding an ear of corn and with 5 teepees in the background. These were the people of the Longhouse. They did not live in teepees. I don't think this was an innocent mistake, an attempt to recognize the 5 nations of the Iroquois Confederation, although by 1809 there were 6, but that's another story. Also, so this is an error that I think needs to be corrected. This seal is ubiquitous throughout the town. It's on town literature. It's on most town vehicles. It's on every resolution. If you take a look at the resolutions that are passed by the town board, it's on every one of them. And it's something that should be corrected. What also might be corrected, in my mind, this looks like an Indian male, a native male, but it should be a woman. The women were responsible for the agriculture in the Iroquois society, including in the Mohawk. And to make that more recognizable, a woman, I think, would be a good idea. The other seal I call the Eastern Door Seal. That's my word, my terminology for it. Nobody can tell me where this came from, but again, it is something that is being used. It's, of course, in the floor of the atrium in Town Hall, and you see it in, well, it's on the business cards. I don't know why, but it's on the business cards. It does nod slightly toward the Mohawk with the rising sun, the Mohawk were called the people of the Eastern Door in the Iroquois Confederation, and of course they would be the first to see the sun in the morning. These would be the mountains of either Massachusetts or Vermont, the Mohawk River here, and then of course this looks like wheat more than corn to me, but represents farming at least. So the bicentennial seal could be replaced with the Eastern Door seal. My personal preference would be to stop using the bicentennial seal for now and begin a program of developing a new seal that would be more representative of our history, and I think which would involve or should involve not just the people of Niskayuna, but the people of the Mohawk Nation, as well as perhaps school children. There's something that could be done. We could have the school work on and developing a new seal for the town. Something else I'm interested in, I'll go through this very quickly, the land acknowledgement statement. This is something very popular up in Canada, and it's beginning to come to the United States. And basically, it's a statement that might be read at the beginning of a town board meeting or the beginning of a Schenectady County Historical Society meeting, acknowledging the people who were here before us. What I've written there that's just my words, an idea of what would be read. But the statement itself is only part of the process. The statement would have to be prepared in cooperation and working together with the people, the Mohawk people. It would represent not just a statement we read once in a while, but it would represent a collaborative, conscientious, and continuous interaction with the local indigenous communities, and as a kind of beginnings of perhaps a reconciliation process of acknowledging colonization and beginning to maybe heal some of the wounds of that. I have an article coming out in the Schenectady County Historical Society sometime soon about that, and I hope to promote that in the region. If we have one area where there's a wide out smoking gun about racial injustice in America, in Niskayuna and in New York, it is with slavery. We don't talk about it much, but it's certainly there and should be talked about. There were 91 years between the Declaration of Independence and the 13th Amendment. For 51 of those years, the slavery existed in New York State. It didn't end until July 4th, 1827. So when Niskayuna after Niskayuna was created in 1809, the first census found 36 slaves in Niskayuna, 8.5% of the population, but they were present in 23.5% of the households. Many households owned just one, but some owned two, a few, I think one owned 4 slaves. In 1820, there were only 10 slaves. I say only, there shouldn't have been any, but 10 slaves, 15 free persons of color. And as near as I can tell, those 25 in 1820 were remnants of the 36 from 1810. Of course, by 1830, there would be no slaves in Niskayuna. No slaves, well, there would be a few exceptions for slavery in New York State, but basically slavery was ended in New York State. From there on in, Niskayuna was not necessarily a welcoming place for Blacks, African Americans. In a few of the years, I didn't do all of them here, just put a few of them, but 2%, 1.3% in 1860, 4.4% in 1880, 0.7% in 1900. And what I think is fascinating about 1900, I mentioned this the other day, is that 8 of those 9 were one family, John and Hattie Ball. John was born in Mississippi, Hattie was born in Virginia, probably, I'm guessing, I don't really know, as slaves, and there's 6 children. What brought them to Niskayuna? They were not there in 1810, but they were in Niskayuna. They had a house. They were the only Black household in Niskayuna, certainly at that point in time. So it's sort of an interesting conundrum. I'd like to see if I could find out more about them. Fast forwarding to the present day, Niskayuna as in 2010 with 1.9% Black, 3.3% according to estimates for 2019. Compare that with the city of Schenectady, 24% in 2010, 20.8% in 2019. It really tells you that in my opinion, something's going on here. Those numbers don't turn out that way by accident. Something's going on, but I'm not sure we know fully about what it is. In addition, looking at the population, the percentages in 2019, 3.3%, it's sort of an embarrassment to think that in 1810, we had more Black people in Niskayuna, percentage-wise, than we do today. Finally, and just very quickly, two issues that I think should be developed or should be investigated more deeply in terms of Niskayuna's racial history. The Grand Boulevard development, which began at the beginning of the 20th century to develop what was began as a Grand Boulevard development. It became the Grand Boulevard Association, and eventually is what we call now Old Niskayuna, a development for scientists, engineers, well-trained, well-educated people from GE, when GE was emerging in the early parts of the 20th century. And it was meant to be a very exclusive community. They called themselves a restricted residential community, the first residential community, suburb, I guess you might call it, in Niskayuna. How it was restricted is something I don't know. Whether it was restricted by association membership, by deed, by mortgages, is something I think worth looking at just to see what it was. You've certainly excluded people by class and wealth, and it's very clear the people in Grand Boulevard not only didn't want anything to do with the people of Schenectady, Black or white, German, Irish, whatever. They were considered a lower class. They didn't want to have much to do with the farmers of Niskayuna either. So that's something I think needs to be looked at. And I've heard a number of people comment to me about the Niskayuna Central School District, established in 1953, around the time of the Bromby Board of Education decision. Is there a connection? Again, I don't know. But in 1953, the people of Niskayuna definitely wanted to sever connections with the school district of Schenectady. There was a brief period when there was talk about trying to send our children, the Niskayuna children, to the city of Schenectady for education, become part of the Schenectady School Board. That was voted down very quickly, and decided to create our own school district and to create a quote-unquote world-class college preparatory high school, which they certainly didn't see was the standing of the school district in Schenectady at the time. So again, whether there's a connection, whether it's overt or just because it was ordinary to be racist, is something I don't know, but I think it's something that would be worth trying to find out more about. In any case, I appreciate your time. I sort of look forward to, if you have any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer them as best as I can.
Thank you, Dennis. That was very informative.
Extremely informative. Do we have any questions?
This is Preeti. That was informative. I was wondering, what role did redlining play in this concentration, the different demographics of Niskayuna and Schenectady?
The simple answer is I don't know. I kind of assume it had an effect, but I haven't found the evidence. I suspect it's out there, but I haven't found the evidence. So, I don't want to say, it certainly had an influence. I guess I'm enough of a academic historian that, I don't want to say something is so unless I can stand by some evidence or show some evidence to support it. But it's something that should be investigated. And I hope I will find a time to do that.
Dennis?
David?
Yeah, thank you. The data you presented on the population percentages of African Americans or Black people in Niskayuna, is that from the early 19th century onward? is that from early census data, or how was that?
That's from
How was that
census
data
data.
collected?
From census data. Yeah.
Okay.
I went through. Fortunately, with Niskayuna's population didn't top 1,000 until 1890, I don't think. So the number of people was not extensive. So it was fairly easy to go through 20 pages of census data and find the numbers.
Got it. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other comments, questions?
I just want to say thank you so much for your presentation. And I really wish that there was a lot more of this discussed in the Central School District. I definitely remember learning about the Longhouses and the Three Sisters, but I really didn't know the kind of like celebration that the Iroquois had for never breaking a treaty. I feel like that's very important to acknowledge, especially because a lot of the swing states in this election relied on current land like maintained by natives. So I loved your presentation. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. The truth of the matter is, I didn't know about the two row wampum treaty until a couple of months ago myself. I had never heard of it. But I wrote a little gleanings article in the Gazette about it a few months ago.
I have one question for you in reference to your determining the 3% of African Americans in Niskayuna currently. Is that from census, or does that include other ethnic groups, or is that just African Americans?
According to quick facts from the U.S. Census Department, that's just Black or African American alone. So there's also a group 3% or two or more races, but it doesn't specify which race, although I don't like that term anyway. But that's from the Census Department, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
You did a great job. I mean, I've been here 32 years and I had no clue.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dennis. We're going to be working with you, I believe. We will be contacting you further and trying to pry your valuable knowledge away from you. So thank you much for helping us.
Well, I'm glad to do it. And if you have any questions, I tell you, I probably won't have the answers, but if there's any specific questions, I'll be happy to do what I can to find the answer.
Thank you so much.
And I do hope you'll consider doing something about that seal. I really think it needs to be fixed.
We'll get to work on. I'm
Yeah.
glad that it's raised. We'll get to work on it as a task force, and we'll put our heads together and discuss it. Thank you so much.
Great. That's great. Thank you. I'm happy to be able to do this.
Okay. Dennis, we can excuse you. So, thank you. I also have noticed that Dr. Horton had to leave, as I said earlier, so we'll excuse him. And we'll proceed at this point with the next portion of our agenda. Jamie Puccioni has agreed to discuss the working groups and how we came about, we meaning the leadership committee, the leadership in our first leadership meeting discussed moving forward with work groups. And we have some suggestions as to what working groups should be formed. So this would be our preliminary discussion as a full task force regarding the work groups. And I'm going to turn the floor over to our Vice Chair, Dr. Puccioni. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Just want to make sure that you can see the slides that I've presented. Okay, great. So the leadership or the executive committee met and we discussed the development of task force working groups. And in our discussion, we always wanted to link the working groups to the town resolution. I think it's very important to make sure that we ground all of our work in the resolution to make sure that we are being focused and we meet our charge. So I just want to remind everyone that the resolution, which is posted in our shared drive and everyone should have access to, the third component specifically states that we are assessing and analyzing whether town programs, policies, practices, services, and public engagement efforts exacerbate racial disparities. So from that, we proposed that our working groups be based upon the town departments. So what we did was identified all of the town departments, considered the town departments' purposes, and then grouped them in ways that made logical sense in terms of the town department's purpose. So we are recommending first public safety working group, which will consist of the police department and the justice court. The second group, community services, would encompass the parks department, the senior center, community programs, and interface with Niskayuna schools. It should be kept in mind that the task force does not have any purview over the Niskayuna School Board, but there may be instances in which we can interface with the schools. The next working group is the Public Services Working Group, and that would consist of the buildings, engineering, highways, water and sewer, recycling, and transfer center departments. Next is the town finance, which would encompass the assessor, comptroller, receiver of taxes, town admin, which includes the town attorney, planning, supervisor, board clerk, information technology, and historian. We also recommend that we continue to have the Data and Best Practices Working Group. This is our foundational group to support the data needs of all of the working groups. And then the Structure Group, which is an ad hoc working group. It helped define the task force structure and the bylaws. And so we envision this working group as an ad hoc group that would return to meetings or return to work as needed. So I want to turn this over now to John, because he has developed what I call a roadmap for the working group, and it will help us. We believe that it will help us frame our working group's objectives, purposes, actions, and timeline. So John's going to go and John will discuss the roadmap for the Public Service Working Group.
Great, thank you, Jamie. So yeah, the next few slides are basically off a roadmap document that we created for our group. And I thought it'd be interesting just to share as maybe some ideas for the other groups. It's a one-page document, by the way, which I'm a big fan of being concise, right? So the first part of the document simply lists the members of the group. It lists the specific departments that were responsible for reviewing, and it references that specific resolution that Jamie just mentioned. So it helps make sure our group is very focused on on the intention of the resolution and making sure that we're focused on the job. The next item you can see here is a very brief objective of the group. So this is to conduct public safety focus groups to collect community input, to review Niskayuna Police Department and Town Court or Justice Court policies, procedures, and outcomes to identify potential racial inequities, review relevant best practices, and make recommendations to address issues. And then finally, it's also to support the town in their police reform and reinvention collaborative, which is the town responsibility to comply with Executive Order 203. So it's 3 or 4 sentences, try to be really brief and clear, but that's basically the things that the group is going to be doing. Next slide. Okay. So from there, we tried to figure out the work, right? So we came up with basically 5 different parts or activities. And so the first one is conducting focus groups. The second is collecting best practices and reference materials. And the third is collecting documents, policies, procedures, things like that, and outcomes, arrests, detainments, things like that from police and the town court. So those are kind of 3 efforts where you can see some of our members have broken up a little bit, but it's 3 parallel efforts that we think are important to get the work done for the work group. Number 4 is defining the final report, and I'm a big fan of that. So that helps focus everybody on the end game. So we did spend some time trying to figure out what is it that we're actually trying to create as a result of the effort. And number 5 has not been started, but 5 is just the acknowledgement that once the focus groups, the best practices, and the documents are all reviewed, collected, analyzed, then we all want to work as a group to analyze what we find and make recommendations to address the issues. So if that makes sense, the next slide is a little diagram we have in the middle of the one pager, which just for the visual people in the room like me, it helps me see how the pieces fit together. So you see focus groups. I broke up reviewing the Niskayuna documents and reviewing the outcomes because those may be slightly different. Obviously, the outcomes are an example of something that has to be redacted, for example. And by the way, I do want to acknowledge Paul. We're going to work directly, Paul, with you. And I think Kay, as our communication coordinator, is going to be working directly with you to make sure that the coordination and the communication is as clean and as efficient as possible to get all this material. But anyway, that's a kind of a picture of what we're thinking. And then the last slide, the very end of the one pager, is our first shot, I guess, at the table of contents. This was a discussion item actually last night in our meeting, so it's changing, it's evolving. But the idea is to try to have a very clear understanding of what exactly we're trying to create as a result of our work, so that we can make sure that everything that everyone's doing fits into here somewhere, or at least supports this. So it's very much a work in progress, but the idea is we'd lay out an executive summary, we'd lay out some description of the approach of what we did. And again, this is changing based on input as recent as last night, but the idea is to have results from the focus groups, results of the best practice review, results of the review of the documentation from the police and the courts, and then ultimately findings and recommendations that would help address the racial equity issues that we find. So it's a one pager. I'll post it if the other working groups think that it might be helpful, but for us, it was a nice, easy, simple reference for us to use to describe what we're doing, who we are, and also make sure that everyone's on the same page as far as the final report of the final outcome. Happy to answer questions.
Not a question, John, but I think it was the first or second slide where you referenced that the task force resolution reference, which I think is a great thing to include so early in the document, that will keep us focused on the mission through the eyes or the intent of the task force resolution. So I think that's just a great thing to include. I was glad to see it there. So thank you. Great, thorough job. Really, really impressed. Great work, that working group. Thank you.
It was a team effort for sure. Thank you. Thank you, David.
John and Jamie, I'd just like to point out that Liz has some questions in the comments section about the education and elder care group. Jamie or Dale, if you want to address that based on the executive committee's meeting.
Great. Thank you for that question, Liz. We see the topics that you have brought up in the education and elder care group is part of that community services group. So what I would hope is that that is the group that you'll be conducting that work. It'll just be under that name and now inclusive of some of the other town departments. Does Jillian and Liz, I also want to point out, oh good, that it is my intention to participate in that group with you. And like I shared in some private conversations, I was just waiting until this kind of wrapped up and resolved so that I could then allocate time to that important work.
This is Preeti. I had a question. Those broad groups and how it aligns with the Niskayuna departments is very good. I like that, so people can relate. I had two questions. One is, the community services group is very large. It's a very big in scope. So it may be there'll be multiple groups under that. So first question is, would they be allowed to come up with their own names? I mean, they could be under that group, but the group may want to have a different name that reflects the work they're doing. And my second question is, all these groups have in towns and around us in the state similar work that is being done. So when we align the task force group with the Niskayuna departments, that's what I call is looking inside. I think there is also merit in looking outward, So for example, the one that Jillian and Liz are working on, there's a very big movement, not only in the state, but nationally and internationally, which they talk about age-friendly communities. So they may not choose to call it, but if we can acknowledge that we understand there is this broader work going on, I was wondering what are some suggestions so we don't lose sight of that? And so that was my question.
Preeti, you raised great questions and I saw them in the email. So I was hoping you'd raise them in this public forum so we could chat about it. I definitely see the importance of looking inside, but then also looking outside. And I felt that that information would be great to include in the description of the working group, and as well, after the analysis, linking what we've found inside to outside, to more macro level, like the state, national, international, which you brought up so thoughtfully in your email. So for the purpose of our work, I thought that keeping the names as closely aligned to the town departments would be helpful for the town, like the community residents, to understand what's the task force doing? What are these work groups? What are these work groups doing? Oh, okay, yes, that name is so closely aligned. I understand that. But then in the description of the working group, we can broaden it out. And then in the analysis and the report, make very clear the linkages, like you're saying, to age, community, to all of those broader topics that are so important and linked to, like you were describing, the AARP recommendations and things like that. So that's where I was thinking, and I'm very curious to hear how other people feel.
Preeti, to your second part of the question, and this is something that I believe we talked about, maybe a few meetings ago, is the macro view and the looking outside perspective. Is this perhaps something that the data and best practices group focuses on? That what is it that we've done that has been done outside of the Niskayuna community that is working, that is being worked on? What did they find? What is something that they have seen? What is it something that has been successful on the other in the other communities, or even the state or some other city? So this is an area where I feel the best practices group can bring in that perspective to each work group where some similar work is being done on a macro level. That's just a suggestion.
Let me see. I think you'll find, we'll see how it goes as we go along, but you'll find that we sometimes look broadly at the macro level and then also work granular. You keep going broad scope, narrow, because you need to do both. And so it becomes everybody's role. The only reason I kind of say that is because I know the town of Bethlehem, for example, is doing a lot of work around these areas, climate and I think age friendly. And so we kind of have to be aware as a work group and also as a large group. So we work at it like a very specific level and the broad level. But I think it'll come as we start working, we'll get a sense of that.
There's another question from Liz. Is any political connections with community work group? I'm not very clear on that question, Liz.
Liz, are you asking if the membership of that working group has any connections to town board members or the town in general or town positions? Is that what your question is?
Did she clarify her question? I don't see it.
I think she's typing.
Oh, okay.
I was just going to say, I don't know if she's typing to Jillian or just typing into the chat box.
In general, as well as task
force
involvement.
Maybe
so the members of that working group need to respond, I guess.
Okay, welcome, Arinka. Okay. And
as a member of that group, I am not.
Which task force does she talk? Which work group is she talking about? Is it the police work, the police and courts, or is it also the town services work group?
I believe the town services.
Community service, I'm sorry.
Yeah, the community service.
Did she make that clear in her in her question?
Liz, I think that working group hasn't been totally created yet. There is the elder care and the school or education work group, which falls under that community service subheading or working group category. So right now it's basically you, Jillian, and I would like to be a part of that too. And Jamie also said she wants to be a part of that group. So I think you're just asking the question of 3 or 4 of us, whether we have any town connections or other political connections to that work or that group. And if I'm correct in assuming that, for me, the answer is no. And you've already heard from Jillian, she said no. And then it's you and then Jamie ultimately. So maybe that answers the questions. And
Devon and Alan want to be a part of it.
Oh, gotcha. Yep. Okay.
And at the last education and elder care just discussion, Angela was also there, and so was Ari. So
right.
Potentially they'll want to be a part of the community service group, but still got to figure out who wants to be involved.
Absolutely. And that is kind of our next steps, is thinking about how are the different work groups going to be populated. And of course, as we've said previously, just because there's the rule that only 7 of us can meet without public, viewing, that doesn't mean only 7 people could be part of a working group. I just want to make that very clear.
In fact, in our leadership meeting, when we discussed work groups, we also discussed the idea of members forming subgroups within the work groups. And so having groups that would meet in numbers of less than 7 so they could get the work done. And should the whole group wish to meet, then that, if it's over the 7 number, the 8+, that would or could be public meetings as a matter of course. So work groups will work out those dynamics as they develop. And if we need to amend the bylaws and it comes up, we will then address those issues. Any other questions or comments?
I just appreciate you guys clarifying. Thank you.
Okay, so what we'll do is at the next meeting, when everybody has a chance to digest, we can then vote on the work groups. I'd like to suggest that people consider which groups they're interested in and just start filtering out to the leadership group your interest, so that we can just get those groups populated and you guys can start working. What do you think? Okay, I'm seeing a lot of thumbs up. Excellent. So our next meeting is going to be, and before, I'm not wrapping this up, I'm just reminding everybody what we discussed with our next meeting being the 2nd Wednesday next month, which is December 9th. And before we go there, I'll follow the agenda. John has spoken, but John, are you ready to give us your public safety working group update?
Yes, I will. And Larry's having microphone issues, so I'm gonna go ahead and jump in again, even though I just finished. But I think this is really him speaking.
Yeah, that's actually why I turned to you, because I'm getting thumbs up from Larry, but I know he has no voice tonight. Sorry, Larry.
Yeah, no problem, and I'll keep it brief. I know I just spoke, but so the public safety group is it obviously is underway. We just talked about the one pager and the 3 groups that we've formed, conducting focus groups, collecting relevant best practices, which pretty to some extent gets to one of your comments. I think that's a little team within our working group that's specifically going to go out and find what other organizations and groups are doing similar work that we can leverage or learn from. And then collecting documentation from the police and the courts through Kay, through Paul. So we have calls every other week, which has really been nice. It's a nice touch base with everybody every other Monday. So that's something that's kind of working well for us, I think. We also had a short call this past week with Brian Backus. He is the confidential secretary to Supervisor Syed, and Supervisor Syed has asked him to be the lead, at least the lead point of contact for this task force to coordinate with the town's police reform work, which is in direct response to Executive Order 203. So we were very excited to get a chance to chat with him. The call was actually set up by Ari, so special thanks to her. She knew Brian from a previous life, I guess. So thank you, Ari. The call was very nice, very, very good, great conversation. Brian's a very nice guy, and he explained a little bit of what they're planning. They are intending to have a kickoff meeting. It was originally scheduled, and now it's been rescheduled. So they're still working out the details. But we're going to get a couple seats at that table. And what's exciting is that it sounds like they actually have a piece of the town's police reform work that they're actually going to ask us to take the lead on. So it's very, very exciting. It's nice to get a little bit more clarity on what exactly the town needs and is looking for and how we can help. So we're pretty far underway on that, and we're just waiting for the kickoff meeting to be called. And I think that's basically my input. I do want to make the offer, as Dale and Jamie both mentioned, there's a lot of work going on right now in the public safety group. There's also a lot of work that needs to be done outside the public safety group. But if anyone is interested, especially in one of those 3 teams that we talked about, as being someone to help us, we're always looking for more help. So maybe email Larry. He's kind of the leader of the band here, even though he's muted. So email Larry if you're interested, and let us know if you're interested in one of those 3 groups. We'd love to have your support, and we'll just be very careful not to violate any of the open meeting guidelines. And open up for questions. All right, that's all I have, Paul.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, John and Larry. And at this time, I'm going to open the floor to any additional comments. Yes, Kay.
I just wanted to allude to one of the points that John made about information requests. John and I have been in conversation, and we are going to formalize a process of requesting material and obtaining material, whether it be documentation, data, policies, and things like that. We're trying to formalize a procedure with the town attorney and the town board. So Paul, we'll be reaching out to you over the next couple of weeks to formalize this process and tracking requests and items that are received.
Thank you. Any other comments? Before I close the meeting, are there any new items which any member of the task force wishes to raise at this time?
Dale, this is Preeti. I know Arinka had another group that she was interested in, and I see that she's under her daughter's name. So Arinka, do you want to talk about the group that you were interested in? Are you able to talk?
I never use it for my phone, sorry, so it's a little bit different. But yes, I do want to talk about a group that I'm thinking of forming that includes mental health And although the community doesn't have it, it's under community services, and it could be probably worked out under a different title. I am right now formulating that and doing a little bit of research because I know there are some community services that provide this type of help, and it's also needed. But as at the moment, maybe I just want to put it on the table to have an open discussion about these, and probably it's not going to start up like right away. Maybe like in March or so, until I get more information and material ready to present a good outline and organization. But I wanted to share with all of you to see what all of you think about having a group regarding that.
Arinka, this is Preeti. I spoke with Arinka about what her interest was. And I know Arinka says mental health, but as I spoke with Arinka, what I got a sense was it was not so much as getting people into mental health services. What Arinka was most interested in is getting people, especially who are marginalized, to feel like they belong, that they are not marginalized, they're part of the community. And so we discussed, so it's really not about mental illness. So that's not what Arinka is talking about. And so she did have some ideas. It would be, if you were looking at the umbrella of community services, it could fall there. But I think Arinka's group is separate, or from based on her ideas, it's different from the elder care education one. So maybe I can work with Arinka and for the next meeting come up with a little more tangible idea what it is that you want to formulate and present it at the next meeting. All right.
Thank you, Preeti. I appreciate the fact that you're kind of like being a little bit of a translation of my ideas. I know sometimes my accent could be a little bit difficult, or my ideas too difficult to be understood, but yeah, I am definitely interested in working on that here in this task force. I don't know if anybody has any objection or any suggestion or anything to say about. I think that as we took office, as also the new government starting in January too, I think that it's important that we all feel belong again. We all feel that we are part of, right? And then stop this hatred, start these negative relationships of race and so forth. So I think that it is important to show that, among us, not only among us, but also in the community. So.
Aria, I think that when I think about mental health in terms of our work and perhaps the task force resolution, I think about the defunding the police and the refunding the police movements in terms of, for example, for a domestic violence call or something like that, sending a social worker or a mediator instead of the police first, or send the police first, but then defer to a social worker or a psychologist, perhaps, or something like that. Someone in that field versus the arm of the law intervening in a situation like that. So that's what I think about when. And I thought that's where you were going when you mentioned this. But I think once you and Preeti perhaps and a few others cement what your intentions are in terms of mental health, I think we'll have a lot more buy-in and interest in that work. But anyway, those are just my thoughts, right out of the gate. But I think moving forward, when you again cement the goal of the work, that you'll get more buy-in and participation.
Thank you. That's actually a very good point. We don't really see much about or heard about domestic violence here in Niskayuna, which is in certain way good.
Right.
But it's definitely something always to be aware of.
Arinka and Preeti, Arinka, when you had first, introduced this topic to the task force, it kind of took me back to one of the topics that was sort of put out or discussed with the 21-day racial equity challenge, and it related to what's called as racial trauma, or RBTS, racial based traumatic.
Can you hear me?
Stress. Yes, Angela, we can hear you.
I'm sorry. Someone had me muted.
I cannot hear Angela. Oh. This is the first time I'm doing it from the cell phone. So
I'm sorry, Kay.
Angela, we can hear you. You may just have to be a little louder. That's all. So what I was trying to say is RBTS. I thought that's what the mental health part related to. Again, something, it's a term now. So something that has been related to, post-traumatic mental and emotional injury caused by, racial bias and ethnic discrimination encounters. And, in the US, Black, Indigenous people of color are most vulnerable due to the system that we are in, and I think that would be a good topic to include and explore. And I'm sure you will come across that topic in your research.
Yeah, definitely. This is something that I also was really thinking about, not only just from the point of view, but it's like just of the marginalized populations. And I'm trying to link it to the community programs that they exist right now. So even though that we don't have it, maybe we can try to see what is the overlapping, and that's what I'm doing the research to do a good outline and present it to the group. And these ideas that you guys are putting on the floor are important, so that I can actually focus on certain scenes for the outline.
And actually, Ari, I'm thinking as I hear what you're saying in conjunction with Preeti and Kay, I'm wondering if your exploration, the interest I'm hearing in inclusivity, in response to trauma, is going to be part of the data and best practices group, where you're and because also part of our resolution, the first bullet is, let me go and look at this one more time. Establishing a shared understanding of the term equity and related terminology. And, I feel like maybe what you're uncovering, you're unearthing, is going to help the task force, what in education we call name and notice, some very important issues. And that might fall under data and best practices. So I like that you're going to collaborate and talk with Preeti and further develop these ideas.
Thank you, Anne.
So Ari, one of the things that I'm thinking about too is that you're in general talking about health equity. And so then it sounds as if in terms of concretizing some of these themes, what you are suggesting, let's say, is that, is that experiences of marginalization confer health inequity, whether it be in mental health or other forms. So maybe that is its own piece. But I think as another part of the community service group, I think potentially we have to parse out like social services. So meaning we need to look at like the disparities in, let's say, like CPS usage or calling or things like that. Now that puts us under Schenectady County, and I don't know if that gets into some other areas, but if we are having a discussion about, interpersonal violence, then we also need to look at issues related to, CPS and these other pieces, and that can be parsed out of the community service group. It's still a part of it, but it falls under, let's say, like social services.
Mm-hmm. Yes, Angela. Actually, I'm sorry, I had to put it in my ear. So I know that there's no program in the community that is specifically targeted to the mental health of any of the, like any services at all, like or counseling or anything like that here in the county, in the town. But more of that, I'm not interested so much on like providing those type of services. Instead of that, it's more like informing and preventing rather than to get there when we're as a population,
Oh,
as a community.
absolutely. Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely. No, I agree.
Yeah, so it's more like a prevention.
No, right. Absolutely. I mean, our job is to offer recommendations, right? And so
Right.
we would be, as an example, we would say, for example, if we happen to find that marginalized communities, let's say, have higher rates of incarceration in the community, our recommendations then would be to reform, policing practices. We wouldn't be actually making recommendations to people in the community. Does
Right.
that make sense?
Yeah, exactly. Right. Absolutely. That's absolutely. But there's also some services like that we rely on to the community. To Schenectady County. So that is where it gets a little bit tricky too.
So it sounds like the ideas will be worked on and developed and potentially brought to the next meeting and discussed. And like Ari said, potentially more in the new year.
Yeah.
So not to move us along, but to move us along.
Yeah, no, this is great. I really appreciate the input of all of you. And yes, I mean, it's going to be baby steps until probably next year. But I wanted to bring it on to the table to kind of discuss and get the feedback from all of you, which is very important. All your opinion matters. All of your voices matter because it makes the task force better. So I just want to put it out there. And that's all. Thank you so much. And I was here at 6:20. Sorry. But it was under my daughter's name. So I was like, oh, I'm trying to figure it out, everything. So I'm now stopping now.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Pretty and Ari and Angela, if you're working together on this suggested work group, I recommend that you draft something in writing that you can present to the leadership committee. We'll take a look at it and present it to the entire task force before the next meeting on December 9th, 2020. So I suggest that you come up with your idea for mental health, whether or not you want to make it a subgroup of the community services group or a subgroup of data and best practices as a foundational group, considering the overall ramifications and the development of the term equity as part of our charge. And in your document, I'd like you to just state how that relates to the resolution's missions and assignments, so it's clear for the entire task force. Okay?
Okay, I
Ari?
got it.
Does that make
Does
sense?
it has to be by the next meeting, or it could be? I mean, it could be by the following meeting, like in January.
If you wish, it's just a draft.
Okay.
So bare bones, just so we keep it moving.
All right.
Okay. So any other new business? Do I have a motion to adjourn?
I motion to adjourn.
A second?
I second.
I'll second it.
Oh,
Second.
all in favor? Thank you all. It was a pleasure. Have a great night. We are adjourned. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Oops.